So we've looked at parties in government. Now, turning to parties in the electorate, the second part of that three-part party system, we can see that party labels function in a similar way for us as voters they do for members of the government. They work as cues for us, as a shorthand to help coordinate action. And importantly, they work a bit like brand names. So a party label is a bit like a brand. So you probably have a preference whether you like Pepsi or Coca-Cola. And you're going to buy the brand you prefer whenever possible. And that's helpful because it reduces the effort you have to put into every decision, right? You know, if you prefer Pepsi, you're just going to buy Pepsi. You don't have to make some long decision and weigh the pros and cons of each and consider everything, right? You know, you're just going to get Pepsi. So this helps because it functions to make our lives easier. As voters, we don't have to learn about every single candidate. We know if they have this label, we should expect them to behave a certain way. Now, of course, the label is only as good as it is reliable. So if Pepsi all of a sudden starts changing up their recipe and like half the Pepsi bottles out there are filled with like new recipe Pepsi and it doesn't taste the same and you don't like it as much, then that's not a reliable brand name for you anymore. That's not going to be helpful. That's not going to make it easy for you to just say, yes, Pepsi. And on the other hand, if you were a Coca-Cola fan, maybe you're like, nah, now I should try Pepsi because apparently they've changed, right? So it makes your life harder when they're not reliable. If a Democrat, we would expect typically to be pro-abortion. So if there's a Democrat who's anti-abortion, that complicates things. That's not the way I would expect them to behave based on their label. So this label imposes that sort of conformity cost on the politician, the Democrat who now has to be pro-abortion, or the Republican who now has to be anti-abortion. But by sort of mandating that and keeping that label consistent, we can use the label more easily because it's more reliable. And the labels are really helpful because they let us know who to vote for, and they also allow us to reward or punish elected officials as a group. So think back to 2022 before the midterm elections. President Biden, you either were happy with him or you weren't. And he was not up for re-election, right? The midterm elections, all of the House and a third of the Senate are up, but not the president. So if you were happy with Biden and you wanted to communicate that, you could vote for Democrat, since Biden's a Democrat, reward Biden accordingly. If you were unhappy with Biden, you could vote for Republicans and punish Biden accordingly. So even though you couldn't vote for Biden, you could still use that party label to reward or punish him and his party because we can treat them as a bit of a group. Now, that threat of collective punishment gives the majority a really strong incentive to govern in ways that please the voters. So that can help us maintain our agency, right? We are the principals, they are the agents. So we risk agency loss. But because they know we can punish them pretty easily if they stray from the party label too much, or they just do things we don't like, even if it's very on brand, because they know we can punish them, they're not going to do that too much. They're not going to do things that make too much of the public unhappy because they know they'll be punished for it. So that is how parties help organize action in the electorate.